So moving on to the next session, I'm going to welcome Steve Coates, who's the Senior Counsel from Amazon, up onto the stage. And Steve's really going to be talking about domain management and brand protection and what the nexus between those two elements are. And it's something we get asked an awful lot about. So please join me in welcoming Steve up onto the stage.
Thank you. My name is Steve. Mike's on, yeah? Yes. My name is Steve. I work at Amazon. There's a few familiar faces here, but I don't know many of you, and I don't know exactly what I'm going to talk about moving forward, because I was going to poll you to see where we are in the scheme of brand and domain in the audience. How many people do domain management in this room? Can you raise your hand? Okay, so we've got some domainers. Nice, nice. How many do it as more than 50% of their job? Very, very few. How many people do brand protection as part of their jobs? So most of the room. How many of you do that as more than 50% of your job? Right, good number. How many people do it as 10% or less of their job? All right, so somewhere in between that. Okay, good. I've been at Amazon for, well, I started in 2011, and I had a short break at Twitter for a few years. When I joined Amazon in 2011, our legal department was just shy of 150 people globally. So still a big team, but not the size it is today. Now we're over 1,300. I think we're close to 1,400 globally. So to go from 150 people to 1,400 in 8 years, that's a pretty steep growth. The business also has increased, on average 50% per year. So, you can imagine that our problems are increasing just as much, and we're operating in more than one space. We're not just a global bookstore. A few weeks ago, we just launched Project Kuiper, which is our plan to create a satellite network around the world. So when I go into work every day, I have no idea what I'm going to be working on, but I know that it's going to be a challenge. You go from an environment where I sat next to the general counsel and the person who is the general counsel, and now I don't even know what floor they're on. Our CEO is on the floor upstairs, and he's in a totally different building, and we have more than one CEO now. So the growth has been big. I'm from Seattle. I'm actually a rare native Seattleite, and I'm going to ham it up a little bit because our culture in Seattle is just slightly older than this building. And so the things that are important to me are music. Grunge music in particular is very important for my youth. I used to be called Jesus because my hair was so long and I had this beard, and I was one of those kids in these photographs that Chris took way back in the day, late 80s, early 90s. And I worked at this label called Sub Pop, which is a well-known record label in Seattle that signed a lot of these early grunge bands. So that's going to be my theme for the day, is Northwest music. So I take this quote. Malcolm Gladwell, the writer, says there's a 10,000-hour rule to become an expert, right? So you spend 10,000 hours and then you're finally an expert, and that gets you to expertise, but maintaining that expertise takes a little bit more work. I think you can pick apart this quote, and of course, how many lawyers are in the room? Okay, so we're going to pick that apart. But I think that it makes the right statement in that it takes a lot of work to become an expert. And the reason why I asked how many of you in here do something full-time or not is because we're often asked to do things that we're not comfortable with. And we need to have expertise to manage some of the most important online real estate without necessarily the experience that you would want in that environment. I'm thinking for a few weeks I was a product counsel for a drone program at Twitter, and I was asked a question one day. We're going to have a drone with a camera on it in France at a large public event without permission, and then we're going to stream all that video and pictures online. That question gave me a stomachache because I was not an expert at drones. I certainly wasn't an expert at privacy issues, and certainly not in France. And my time and ability to just even issue spot those was limited. And so I think when we and I'll go through some of the tools that I've picked up to try and manage those types of situations, it's good to know what you don't know. So 10,000 hours, if you're associate at a law firm, that's 5 years right there. If you're doing this part-time, it's going to take a really long time to get that expertise. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and pontificate a bit. I'm a total dork. And I've collected comic books since 1979. I've got a ridiculous comic collection. In fact, a few weeks ago, I can show you I'm an expert. I bought a comic book a few months ago for $1,200, and Giant Size X-Men #1, if anyone cares. And then I had it professionally graded because I knew it was a really nice copy. And I sold it a couple weeks ago for $10,500. And I did that because I was an expert at identifying something and knowing that it has more value than the person I'm purchasing it from did at the particular store. So I'm an expert at that. I'm a total music junkie. Music narrates my life. I walk around with those silly iPod, AirPod headphones everywhere. I know a lot about music. I'm an expert in that. I've managed trademarks since 1997. It was a total accident. I was managing a restaurant through college in New York, and I decided I should probably get a job with healthcare benefits, right? Because I never had that before. And I went to a temp agency, and they put me the next week at this law firm called Frost Zelnick. It's a trademark firm, 1997. And I had no idea, I of course had been online for a few years, but I had no idea how fun it was. So I've been managing crazy issues since 1997, totally by accident. That's what I'm an expert at. I'm not an expert at being a parent, but I try. I have 2 young boys, and these are kind of the 4 things that are me. So how do you become an expert when you don't have time? I didn't have time when I got that drone question. When I was asked to manage the domain portfolio at Amazon, I certainly didn't know a lot about domains, and I was nervous about managing the keys for that particular real estate. So my role at Amazon, I have 2 hats. I have a team of 12, and one part of that team manages our domain portfolio and all our live sites. The other part of that manages the what I would call soft IP or non-patent IP for our digital products and services. So that's things like Alexa voice service or Kindle tablets. Recently we have purchased the company Ring, which does video doorbells. We have a bunch of other crazy products and services as well. So how do you become an expert? So you're a godsend. Find your tribe. So this is the band Beat Happening, which you would probably only know if you're from the Northwest or you listen to Nirvana B-sides. Amazing band from Olympia. Find your tribe. So I think Kate and Jack mentioned earlier, you really do need to find your network. Your network is your business teams. Your network is, or we refer to mostly as clients, right? Your network is also your outside counsel. I think even more importantly, your network is your peers. So when I went to Twitter, I moved to the Bay Area. I needed to know a lot of people. I needed to know a lot of people at Twitter. I needed to know people at Facebook. I needed to know people at Instagram. I needed to know people at YouTube. Because the processes that I was creating at Twitter as the first IP counsel, I needed to know what other problems people have faced and failed at. Because failures are the most important things for learning, right? When we launch a product, I ask, what are our learning lessons? When I get to a business meeting, hey, that was a really cool product. What were your learning lessons? Because those failures are what you really learn at. And other people's failures, amazing. At Twitter, I got to see a lot from other people's poor judgment. So people would put stuff on there that other people wouldn't like. Escalations would happen several times a month. And I would get on the phone with the CEO or general counsel and kind of talk them off the ledge of taking or not taking a particular action. All those experiences, all those people, I created a network of peers in the Bay Area, which still exists today. In-house council lunches that happen every other week, hosted by one of the companies. Those are my tribe. And so find that tribe. I'll give you my personal email. I'm your first person in Seattle who's part of your tribe. Ask lots of questions. So this is Nirvana. All apologies. Don't apologize for asking really stupid questions. I ask lots of questions. If you were my outside counsel in this room, you would laugh at me right now because I ask the most simple, basic questions. I recall when I went to Boise to have a sit down with MarkMonitor for the first time, I asked what a glue record was. Why is it called a glue record? Why not just call them name servers? What's the difference between the two? Super simple questions. When I went to Twitter, I sat down with the legal team and I said, how do we generate hashtags? Well, of course, I know that you don't generate them, but I wanted to know, how are they stored? Is there a catalog of them in one place, all these hashtags? Are we able to block or whitelist certain hashtags? And so getting to that happy accident, and I'll get to something later about that same thing, but asking constant questions, silly questions seemingly, will find happy accidents. And I think those happy accidents happen through discovery and being curious. And also when you're working with people who, like Project Kuiper, for example, I know nothing about satellites. I know it's a highly regulated industry. Asking lots of questions with those business teams got us to a better place when we actually filed those filings with the regulatory agencies. So what are you protecting? This is I should go back. I actually did meet Kurt Cobain. I get that a lot because I worked at this label, Sub Pop. I met him once with Courtney Love. And they stumbled in one day to the office, super high. And there was a Guns N' Roses concert the night before, and Axl Rose had asked Kurt to open for them in Seattle, which doesn't go over well. And Axl went up on stage and started bashing Kurt and Nirvana. And Seattleites love their own. This is their tribe. They booed them off the stage. So Guns N' Roses got booed off the stage of their own concert, and I saw Kurt the next day laughing about it. I didn't say Seattle was pretty. This is the Screaming Trees. They had a song, Nearly Lost You. You don't want to lose stuff. So what are you protecting? For me, I have to protect some of the most valuable domain real estate. That includes Amazon.com, as well as Route 53. Route 53 are Amazon's name servers. There's 256 live servers that host a good chunk of the real estate online. So it's not just Amazon I'm protecting. It's a lot of the services in this room. So I take that really seriously. Those are my priorities. We have many other sites, which I can tell you, and then also back-end sites. So there's sites where a lot of our back-end is being hosted. That's my real estate. That's what I'm protecting. On the trademark side or on the brand side, that can be different, right? So I manage a lot of our devices. You may or may not know, Amazon tends to sell their devices at cost. So we make our money through the use of the services through those devices. So when you sell devices at cost, you tend not to have a lot of counterfeit issues. The counterfeit issues come with accessories, chargers, things like that. The actual devices, no. What happens is gray market goods are a problem. So that Kindle device is purchased and then sold in another country where it doesn't work properly, right? Because those services are not available. That leads to a poor customer experience. So my focus is on the poor customer experience. That's what dictates my counterfeiting process, so, or anti-counterfeiting process. The customer. So what am I protecting? I'm protecting that domain real estate for the customer. I want that customer to have a good experience. If it's a device, I want that device to work. I don't want it to blow up from a bad charger. So that will dictate my process there. Last year, we acquired a company called Ring that does video doorbells. These things are sold at a profit, and we have tons of counterfeiting issues. And you can imagine the challenge of protecting a brand like Ring for a video doorbell. So I've had to have a very different process for protecting that particular product. This is Soundgarden. Fell on black days. Don't let the lights go out. So if you are hosting online content, you'll want to make sure that you know how to keep the lights on. My old general counsel used to refer to Amazon.com as a candle burning in a room full of wind. And your job is to keep that light on. And so I really do think about it in terms of keeping the lights on. When you think about how you're going to protect something, I think it's really important to think about all the particular things that you don't control, right? So Amazon.com, I have that registration. It's managed by MarkMonitor. I don't control MarkMonitor. The registry is managed by VeriSign. So the actual domain name sits with VeriSign, another thing I don't control. You can have additional processes that you can put in place. So internally, there are 3 people in the company who have the authority to change Amazon.com. I'm one of them. And you can have processes for that plan of when are you going to change, how are you going to change, if you have to make a change, if there's a critical failure with the DNS. What are you going to do? What scenarios will you make a change? What's the timeline? What happens if it's 3 in the morning? Those are the kind of things that you should have in place. And is it important for you to control all 3 aspects of the DNS for that? Who's involved in the DNS for your company? What are their phone numbers? Who at MarkMonitor do I call at 3 in the morning to help me through that change? These are the things that you don't control that you need to have some sort of plan. So when I think about don't let the lights go out, I think about what are the things that I don't control and how do I make them better? This is Modest Mouse, super fun band, super playful. These walls are paper thin. Understand your real estate. And I'm talking about online real estate. Registries, there are so many now. I don't even know how many there are, 1,500 registries. They all have different terms of service. They all have a different number of available, I think I'm on 2 microphones, available name servers. So if you're operating a site in Egypt, for example, you can only have 3 name servers. Well, what happens, if you only have 3 to choose from, you're going to be very careful about what services you might use. And in Egypt, to change those name servers, you have to have a notarized piece of paper that you send to the University of Cairo, and it goes into a queue, and you might get an update in 4 to 6 weeks, right? So updating your name servers in Egypt is a shit show, right? And so if you have a critical failure, you're going to have to know that you may not be able to fix that for 4 to 6 weeks. So getting to that expertise, I'm not an expert in Egypt, but I had to get really, really good really fast. So there's lots of things in that process that I don't control, but by asking lots of questions to the business about what is exactly we are trying to accomplish by operating this service, why are we doing it? Do you guys know that if we have a critical failure, we can't get it back up and running for 4 to 6 weeks potentially? So that will create conversations with your DNS team to have a plan for that. So whether you roll back or roll forward with changes for critical failures, asking lots of questions, knowing what that real estate is. If you have a service that is creating user-generated content like Twitter or Facebook or Twitch, you're going to want that to be on real estate that has some sort of process, because at some point there will be infringing content on there, or there will be the solicitation of sale of counterfeit products. You want to make sure that it's hosted on a registry or on a domain name with a registry that has the ability for an appeal process. So there are some registries in the world that have made agreements with the content industry where they white label takedowns with certain studios. Or there are registries, even here in Europe, that have terms of service that if you are selling counterfeit products, the registry has the ability to cancel that domain name without an appeal process. So you'll want to get familiar with what you're creating and what those terms of service are, and then have conversations also with those registries and explain to them why that particular policy is making it difficult for you to build on their real estate. And that's also an important conversation, the things that you don't control. Also, the world's changing. China, for example, now, if you have a live site in China, it has to be licensed with the regulatory agencies there. And also, that domain name, or domain names, can only come from certain registries, and those domains have to be managed by a Chinese registrar. So if you're going to have a live site in China, which I manage, they have to be only from a certain number of TLDs. They have to be managed in China by a Chinese registry that is a registrar that is also licensed. MarkMonitor can help you through that process. And you have to have periodic audits where they tell you that you're doing something wrong. And depending on where in China that's being audited, because there's different regions, they have different standards. It's all arbitrary. Know your real estate. This is a band called Mad Season. Mad Season is no longer exists, but Lane Staley is the singer from Alice in Chains. You might know that band. They have this song, River of Deceit. And I put this quote up here. It's a little cheeky. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So back to Kate and Jack's point about knowing your tribe. You need your tribe, right? You want to keep those people close. That's your industry peers. That's your in-house people. You also have a lot of enemies out there. Those enemies know more than you do about stuff. So how do you get back to that expertise? How do you get really good at online brand protection? You do it by figuring out how they monetize. You do it by being on these boards and finding out what kind of things they do. What bots do they create to manage that those schemes? On the domainer side, you want to go to domainer conferences. NamesCon is one, and so these are the people who they have classes how to monetize. What's the phrase they use? Branded domains, I think is what they call it. So they'll go out and buy, obviously, domain names with brands in them and then monetize them. How do they do it? You'll learn a lot about that by just going to those sessions and asking questions. And soon you'll get a better brand protection enforcement strategy by registering those domain names or knowing at least how they monetize those. So keeping those enemies close, you'll also buy some loyalty with them as well. So they'll know you, you'll see you at conferences, they'll know you're from Amazon or Twitter or wherever, and you'll just be a little bit more cordial, and you'll also have a direct contact with some of these folks, so when there is an issue, it's a little bit easier to manage. How am I on time? I stand between you and lunch. That's all I have, but I am super open to questions. You can ask me anything, and I'll probably tell you the truth. Yeah, man.
I was wondering, how important do you think is to actually purchase domains that are related to your brand, although if they are not actually your domain? So, like, I don't know, I have prettypuppies.com, and how much should I invest in actually purchasing prettypuppies.es, IT, whatever, or even the changes of the name, like Pretty Cats, or I don't know, something like this. Because I'm not sure how much someone who has that domain can he actually do with it.
Yeah, so I think it really depends on who your customer is. I think that, for me, I manage a truly global online service. So Prime Video is one. PrimeVideo.com is available in almost every country and territory in the world. So for that service, I'm going to want a lot of names to prevent typo squatting, to prevent phishing. So I'm going to go pretty broad. When I register domain names for a different product, Kindle Worlds is an example. Kindle Worlds is, does anyone know fan fiction? It's our attempt to legitimize fan fiction. So fan fiction online is, talk about content protection. Fan fiction are stories where you, essentially writers, fans will go and play it in someone else's sandbox. So the most popular fan fiction genre is Star Trek, where, was it Kirk and Spock are gay lovers, right? So I think Paramount owns Star Trek, if I remember correctly. They don't love that fan fiction. They lose control of that IP. So Kindle Worlds was an attempt to legitimize that. So going out to content owners and convincing them to allow writers to create fan fiction in their sandboxes was really difficult. So my customer there was the IP rights holders. My other customer was the actual authors who will go in and create stories around this. So, G.I. Joe and Transformers were a couple that, we had signed. When I knew who my customers were, I then went and engaged and created contracts and terms of service around that, to protect those two customers. But from an online brand protection perspective, you're going to go to Amazon.com for that particular service. I didn't have to worry so much about brand protection in terms of domain registrations, so I only got a few. Or when purchased Whole Foods. Whole Foods is here in the UK, US, Canada. Well, Amazon owning Whole Foods, probably got to think about it from a global perspective. So taking that portfolio of 600 names and really blowing it up, or going into a new industry, I think it's important to register quite a bit, depending on how much of that online presence will be. So Amazon going into healthcare, for example, I had to think about not knowing exactly what we were doing, trying to think about what Amazon for healthcare will be in 10 years, not just 2 months or a year. What will that look like in 10 years? Yes?
And with purchasing all those alternative endings and alternative TLDs, would you say sort of bigger brands would be sort of making use of those, or always feel comfortable and stick with that .com or .uk based in the UK? So, for example, Amazon.shop or Amazon.fashion or whichever sort of company Amazon might purchase or make use of those TLDs.
Yeah, some are here to stay. So if we're talking about what I refer to as new Gs, the .shops in the world, some of those are here to stay, but there have some have failed already. Some have terms of service that are not great. Some have dropped their prices to the point where I don't think a legitimate site could be successful operating on one of those TLDs because there's just so much squatting that happens. So they actually devalue their real estate when they make those pricing policies. The CC-TLDs are also somewhat problematic if you have, universities that do everything on paper and don't operate 24 hours a day. I think I do a risk and security analysis for each TLD that I've been part of a launch on. And sometimes we have these leadership principles at Amazon. One of the leadership principles is disagree and commit. And my role as an attorney at Amazon is to get to yes and have an accurate legal portrait of what that legal risk might be for this thing that doesn't exist yet. On the domain side, I have to disagree a lot and really bang doors and say, okay, well, if we operate in Egypt, here is the security risk. And so that disagree voice in me is a bit different for those types of issues.
Any more questions? Anything on?
You mentioned protecting servers. Do you have some strategies, just some top pointers on how to protect your servers from an online point of view, not just the physical?
Yeah, so for things like DDoS attacks, you can have some protection by diversifying the different providers of those services. So if you go to Amazon.com, you'll see that we have 3 different providers. There's Ultra, who is there? Ultra, Route 53, which is our in-house version. Route 53 is innovative in the sense that each server configuration is unique. So Route 53 is able to withstand DDoS attacks in ways that other services can't. And so those 256 name servers that I have live.com sites for and org sites, the large number is to create that if the DDoS attacks happens on any one of those servers, it would have to be all of them and for that service to go down, and so far it has not. We've had instances of slowdowns just like any other service had, but yeah, diversifying the servers.
I see a lot of typo domains being used as PPC sites. Do you have a policy on that? Because there are so many potential typo domains that you can have.
Yeah, kind of like what Jack mentioned earlier. I'm not so worried about the pay-per-click sites. You kind of have to identify what the real harm is. So if it's a domain name that someone in the company wants that's a typo squat domain and it's just a pay-per-click, then I'll make that a priority. But pay-per-click I'm not typically worried about. What I'm more worried about is those typo squat domain names being used for more malicious purposes. So that can be phishing schemes with email and things like that. That's really where my priority is. So the more malicious use. And sometimes those typo squat names might appear just like pay-per-clicks, but people are using them for email as well. So some of the counterfeit issues, or what I refer to as my biggest priority from an online brand protection perspective, is capturing of user login information. If I'm facing an issue where I think user login information is being compromised, I'll make that my largest priority. That's where I measure the team by the minute.
Time for one last question, if there is one.
You guys are easy.
No?
Excellent.
I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Steve.